In the throbbing heart of the night, a young woman named Amélie stood in the gloom outside her home. An ominous silence wrapped around the house, the stillness punctuated only by the rustling of unseen creatures. The house, usually a haven of comfort and warmth, now loomed like a menacing specter, its windows staring blankly into the darkness. The air hung heavy with an unseen menace, a sinister aura that seemed to seep from the very walls of her home, twisting the familiar into something alien and foreboding. Shadows stretched out from the corners, their inky tendrils seeming to breathe, to pulse with a life of their own. Fear prickled at the edges of her consciousness, a cold unease creeping up her spine. Yet, there was also a strange pull, a morbid curiosity that pushed her towards the unknown. The house beckoned her, its whispering walls calling her name. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open and crossed into the darkness. As soon as she crossed the threshold, a wave of chilling air washed over her. It was as though she had stepped into a world where the sun's warmth had been replaced by the icy breath of an unseen specter. The air was thick, saturated with a sinister aura that clung to her like an unwanted shroud. It was an energy that prickled at her skin, sending shivers down her spine and making the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. The house, once a sanctuary filled with warmth and love, had been transformed into a chilling labyrinth of dread and fear. The silence was deceptive, for it was punctuated by whispers, so soft yet unmistakably present. These were not the comforting murmurs of a gentle breeze, but the unsettling echoes of malevolent voices, whispering secrets that were not meant for the living to hear. The shadows, once benign and familiar, now danced with a life of their own. They stretched and twisted, creating grotesque shapes that played tricks on her frightened mind. The darkness seemed to pulsate, as if it were alive, swallowing the fragments of light that dared to intrude upon its dominion. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the escalating dread that consumed her. She felt the presence closing in, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. And then, from the depths of the shadows, she heard it, a voice. Not just any voice, but one she knew all too well, calling her name in a chilling whisper that seemed to freeze her very soul. Suddenly, a voice she recognized called her name from the shadows. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she realized the voice belonged to someone long gone. The voice, so familiar yet so eerie, echoed in the hollowness of her once cherished home. A sudden chill filled the room. The temperature plummeted as if the very warmth of life was being sucked out. Suddenly, she felt them. Invisible hands, icy and cold, gripped her. They were relentless, pulling her deeper into the abyss of her own home. She could feel the cold fingers of the unseen force, like tendrils of a malevolent creature wrapping around her, dragging her towards the unknown. She tried to resist, to pull away, but every effort was met with a stronger, more insistent tug. The invisible hands were unyielding, tightening their grip with each passing second. The unseen force seemed to feed off her fear, growing stronger and more powerful with each beat of her terrified heart. In her desperation, she tried to scream, to call for help, but her voice was trapped, strangled within her. It was as though the air itself had turned against her, refusing to carry her pleas. All that echoed back was the cruel laughter of the voice, a chilling soundtrack to her unfolding terror. Every corner of her home, once filled with laughter and love, was now a stage for her nightmare. Her heart pounded against her chest, a futile drumbeat against the escalating terror. She could feel the dread, the hopelessness, the absolute terror seeping into her very bones. The unseen force was relentless, its invisible hands dragging her further into the darkness, away from the faint glimmers of safety. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own home, with no escape from the invisible terror that had taken over. Paralyzed by fear, she could only watch as the door slowly creaked shut. The last sliver of light was snuffed out, sealing her fate in the haunted abode, leaving her alone with the invisible terror that had become her reality. With the last sliver of light extinguished, Amélie was left completely at the mercy of the malevolent spirit. In the oppressive darkness, she was a lone beacon of vulnerability, her fear a siren call that echoed through the haunted halls of her once safe haven. The spirit reveled in her terror, feasting on it as a predator would on its prey. Each whimper, each shudder of her petite frame only served to stoke the insatiable hunger of the unseen entity. An unnerving symphony of her fear and the spirit's cruel delight filled the air, chilling to the very bone. Amélie's despair was palpable, a tangible force that seemed to thicken the air around her. A sense of helplessness enveloped her, as suffocating as the darkness that bound her. The home she had known, the place where she had laughed and loved, was now a sinister trap. Each familiar corner held a new terror. Each cherished memory was drowned out by the malicious whispers that seemed to seep from the very walls. She was a prisoner in her own home, held captive by an entity that knew no mercy, no compassion. The spirit reveled in her anguish. Each tear that coursed down her cheeks seemed to fuel its sadistic enjoyment. With each passing second, the spirit grew stronger, its terrifying presence expanding, filling every nook and cranny of the house. The darkness seemed to pulse with its power, a horrifying testament to its growing strength. In the heart of this gloom, Amélie was but a withering ember, her strength ebbing away with each heartbeat. Her mind teetered on the edge of insanity, the relentless terror threatening to shatter her into 1,000 pieces. Yet in her heart, a tiny flame of hope flickered stubbornly, refusing to be extinguished. But the spirit was relentless, its icy grip tightening around her, squeezing the last vestiges of hope from her. The spirit's cruel laughter echoed around her, a sound as cold and harsh as the grave. It reveled in her despair, her utter helplessness, and with a final triumphant roar, it dragged her deeper into the inky abyss. With a final cruel laugh, the spirit dragged her deeper into the darkness, leaving the audience wondering what could possibly happen next. The door to her home creaked shut, sealing her fate within the haunted abode, a chilling reminder of the terror that lay within.